Hello, and thank you for joining me again today on the Finding Hope After Loss podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a review or rating on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a moment and really helps the show reach more loss and infertility families. Today's episode is focused on the subject of trying to conceive after going through pregnancy or infant loss. I am talking with Lindsay and Karina, who share about the challenges and fears of going through this difficult period. Lindsay went through infertility, including going through IVF, and had several miscarriages. She now has a rainbow daughter. Karina lost her daughter when her water broke at 17 weeks. She is currently still trying to get pregnant and hopeful that she will bring her baby home soon. Hello, everybody. Today I am here with Lindsay and Karina, and we are going to be talking about trying to get pregnant after going through loss. So, Lindsay, would you like to introduce yourself and say a little bit about where you are in your journey?
Yeah, hi, my name is Lindsay. I am very fortunate that I actually had my daughter earlier this year after years of infertility and loss. I think we'll probably get into it a little bit more on this call, but I'm really honored to be able to be speaking on this subject today.
Thank you so much, and congratulations on your daughter. Karina, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and where you are in your journey?
Yes, my name's Karina. I am still on my journey. I lost my daughter in February of 2023, and since then we've kind of been on a roller coaster of trying to get there, and we're still on it. So,
Yeah, it's definitely a roller coaster, as you said.
absolutely.
So, how did you guys know that you were ready to try again after loss?
So for me, I feel like the loss was, of course, very unexpected, and so as soon as it happened, we were kind of just like, okay, like, where do we start from here? It kind of really solidified the fact that we do want to start a family. And so from the time we had the loss, we've kind of been focused on getting there. I find that now that we're a lot closer, now it's getting kind of nerve-wracking and scary and things like that. But we've pretty much been on the same page since everything happened.
I kind of feel like, for me, anyways, after going through loss, that I was so focused on the getting pregnant part that it actually happening part was like not something I thought about a lot.
Absolutely.
And how about you, Lindsay?
Yeah, so I actually went through years of infertility. So for me, I think time was a big factor. It took me a while to get diagnosed with PCOS. And then, my husband and I tried for a while on our own. We then went through Clomid and had our first miscarriage. And then it kind of led all the way up till IVF. So for me, it just felt like, if I don't keep on this journey, if I don't keep going, like I'm going to run out of time, which I think is something that a lot of
Yeah.
women feel, especially as we get older.
Yeah, definitely. And then having the infertility too, we dealt with that as well due to PCOS. And yeah, it was like, you know, uh, I feel like with infertility too, and going through loss, that every month after that you're trying just feels like it's like a year. Each month feels so long when you're trying.
Yeah, it really does.
So for each of you, was your loss your first baby, or do you have any living children at home before your loss?
So I do not. My loss was my first baby. Just like the two of you guys, I also suffer from PCOS. So go figure, it's a lot more common than I think I realized when everything was happening. But she was our first, hopefully not our last.
Oh yeah, PCOS is so fun, isn't it?
Those.
Ugh. Yeah, for us, I have a stepson, but my multiple miscarriages were all, my first that I was actually pregnant with.
Before going through loss, did you know anybody else who had gone through it?
I don't think I had anyone that closely to me that had gone through it. I have like family who struggled with infertility and they eventually went the IVF route. And so they were able to conceive that way. But no one close to me that, kind of got, so far into the pregnancy and then just kind of wasn't anymore.
I unfortunately did know a lot of people. I mean, I guess fortunate because I feel like when you're going through loss and infertility, it's great to have a community. But after going through my own loss, I really found out even more people that I didn't know because they weren't as open about it before I went through it. But I realized there were a substantial amount of women in my life that had gone through it.
Yeah, and I guess I should say after my loss, I think is when they kind of all came out through the woodwork. But like prior to my loss, like you said, a lot of people don't really talk about it, so you don't really realize how many there are. But it's like once, everything happened, it was almost like a bad signal went out. And there was just like people like, yeah, I lost three and I've lost two. And I was just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's crazy to me that we don't ever know these things about the people in our lives, because they just don't tell us. And it's just, yeah, I had the same experience where like all these people were like, I've had it too. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I never knew.
Yeah, in a way, it made me feel kind of crazy because I was like, am I like, not to say overreacting, but I was so heavily impacted by it. And, just now, even in my regular life, like, we bring up our daughter and just try and find different ways to honor her all the time. And then there's so many people that, they kind of just it seemingly move on and don't really think about it. So for a while, I was like, am I like not handling this properly? Because I feel like it was like such a huge loss. And some people just talk about it like it's not impactful to them.
Yeah, that's really hard too when you see other people and they act like it's not a big deal, but I've come to learn that just because they don't talk about it doesn't mean it's not a big deal to them. They just
Yeah.
don't always talk about it for whatever reason, but I can definitely understand how that would make you feel that way.
Yeah, and I think I mean, after my first loss is when I found your account on Instagram. And part of the reason that I wanted to be so open about all of my losses is because I even found, finding community online with people who had gone through all different kinds of loss and just how supportive I think every single loss account I found was made me really want to share my journey in case there were women in my life that, were looking for support but weren't sure how to ask for it.
Yeah. And I think something that people maybe don't realize is like when you're pregnant and you're kind of in that getting ready phase, like your algorithms are like everything motherhood, everything baby,
Oh,
like
yes.
everything so heavily. And then when that loss happens, it's like still very prominently in your face. I know for me, same thing after my loss, I discovered your Instagram as well as a couple of others. And like, I was very intentional about trying to shift my feed algorithm a little bit because it was so triggering. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't like be on here. So that was a
Yeah,
lot.
that was the worst. I remember a year after we lost Jasmine, I got something in the mail actually from Target and it was like celebrate your baby's first birthday and I'm like, "Oh my God,
Mhm.
like why are you sending me this?"
And they're like, your baby's the size of a cantaloupe, and you're like,
Like, yeah, I wish. Thanks.
yeah, like thank you for the reminder.
Yeah, that's a good point though. It's hard when and I was trying to like hide everything and like you try to, shift it to where it's not showing those things, but it was hard because it just kept showing those things and you're like, I don't want to be faced with this every day.
Yeah, it takes a while for sure.
And I think even too, like, I mean, you can hide as many accounts as you want, but then if you're at a certain age, it all of a sudden feels like everyone in your life is now getting pregnant and having babies. And, with family or with friends, it's at some point you're like, well, I can't hide literally everyone that I know. But it does feel like that's what happens, especially if you're going through infertility or going through loss.
That is true. I didn't think about it that way, but you're probably right that, it's like, well, you're this age, so everybody your age is having kids, so you probably want to see this. And you're like, no, I don't want to see this. So I know both of you mentioned that you have PCOS. Has that impacted your journey to get pregnant at all?
For me, it's impacted it a lot. So I found out I had PCOS maybe like a year before I got pregnant. I was having a lot of pelvic pain and I had like an excess of fluid, but they couldn't really figure it out. And I got very burnt out just like going to doctors and visits and trying to really pin it down. Once I got pregnant, they kind of tell you, hey, if they're not bothering you, like you don't bother them. But it was just a lot of discomfort after my loss, they were still there. They had gotten bigger. So I actually got a laparoscopic myomectomy in July of this year to get my fibroids removed finally. So I did that. 10 out of 10 recommended, because like the feeling in my body was pretty much night and day, even though I do still suffer with a lot of the other PCOS symptoms. But getting that, trying to get like my blood sugar and A1C under control, because that kind of creeped up to a pre-diabetic state. Unfortunately, with my surgery, they did find about 50 other small fibroids in my uterus. So now we're kind of in a race against time, because my doctor's like, hey, you're gonna like have to get a hysterectomy at some point. So it kind of changed the playing field of like where we're at in that journey completely. Cause you go from thinking like, okay, I'm gonna take care of this and have some time, and then like you are like, oh, I really like don't have time, and like the chances are even slimmer than I thought. So we're kind of navigating that at this point.
Oh wow, that's definitely a lot to think about. Did they say how long until you would have to have that done, or they give you a time
So
frame?
they're very small, like luckily, but like it's pretty much like the whole uterus just looks like bubble wrap, for lack of a better expression. So she said it would be years. She's like maybe like 10ish or something. I just turned 30, so I'm already kind of in that point where, like you said, everyone's having babies. Like you're kind of creeping up there when people are like, okay, now it's gonna get harder. So I think for me and my husband, we're just kind of at the point where we're like, okay, like I literally finished my birth control pack from when I was not able to start trying post surgery this week. And now it's like, oh snaps, like this is about to be really real. And like, do we do it? Do we not do it? And not also not knowing if it's gonna be easy or if we're gonna be able to just naturally conceive, it just puts a whole new, I think, like meaning behind that biological clock really ticking, because you just have another factor in there.
Right. And yeah, when we're up against that age, I mean, I hate it because people, are still able to have babies after 30, after 35, even, 40, but it makes you feel really old when you're told like, okay, you hit 30 now, like you're old.
I tried so hard not to get pregnant in high school, and then I'm like, I'm like, for now to be like, and now it's not that easy. And the people who did, they're on like their second and third, and it's just, it's really just like mind-boggling at times.
Yeah, I know. I remember thinking that too. Like they make it sound like it's so easy to get pregnant, and then it's not for some of us.
Yeah, for me, so I actually was unable to conceive on my own. So my husband and I tried for 6 months, lots of trying, and then went to my doctor because she had basically said, try for 6 months and then we'll talk about it. And I actually went on Clomid for 6 months. And on the last month, I got pregnant for the first time with twins. And unfortunately, we lost them. I had a missed miscarriage. So all of my miscarriages have been miscarriages. And then they sent us to our fertility clinic, which was, wonderful, wonderful place to go. And we tried doing IUIs because essentially my doctor told me, if we can just get you to ovulate, like we can make this happen. And it's still not an exact science. There's a lot of timing that goes into it. So many tests, so many ultrasounds. And then finally, I went the IVF route and got pregnant for the second time, which we lost that pregnancy at about 9 weeks. And then I had to wait. I actually wound up having a fibroid. And again, it was another miscarriage. And then had a chemical pregnancy for my next transfer. And finally, my doctor said, you know what, like, let's try doing a frozen natural transfer. So it's not a lot of medication. Essentially, it goes kind of off your cycle with just some support medication instead of completely hijacking your cycle. And that's the one that worked for our daughter. So we really ran the gambit of, pretty much everything we could, to the point where we were starting to talk about, if surrogacy would maybe have to be our option. And we did, because of our first loss. And when we did IVF, we did actually get all of our embryos genetically tested, which still isn't an exact guarantee, but it does get you closer, hopefully, to a live birth.
So I'm curious too, when you were originally diagnosed with PCOS, were you really told much about it? Or were you just kind of told, hey, like you might have trouble getting pregnant, you might need medicine for that? Like, did they tell you about any of the other symptoms or like other things that it can cause or anything like that?
For me, I feel like it was very vague. I feel like they don't often know like what it's coming from. So it's kind of just like, yeah, you have this PCOS. And like they really just did it off of the ultrasound because they saw the fibroids in there. But, they don't really explain to you. Well, they didn't explain to me all of the mood changes and the hair, like facial hair, like weight gain and like being extremely like tired all the time. Those are things that like after when I started to do my own research, I was like, oh, like this is not all like super normal. So I don't feel like they really told me. Also, to what Lindsay was saying, it's interesting because I know a lot of women use Clomid, but in our journey, we also went the route of having my husband fertility tested, and we figured out that his testosterone was pretty low and his counts were low, and so they put him on Clomid as well, just to kind of help get those counts up and things like that, and that seemed to kind of help. So it's just interesting how they use similar things for opposite situations within like the same scenario, if you will.
I actually didn't realize they could use it on men. So that's
Yes.
interesting.
So they do it to help get the testosterone up. I guess there's like a testosterone shot that men can have as well, but it makes them completely infertile. So basically, they take the Clomid with another medication that makes it so the Clomid doesn't turn into estrogen, and it helps the testosterone production a lot. So he's been doing that, I would probably say like 4 or 5 months. And it's kind of giving like a boost to the numbers and his energy and stuff like that anyway. So that was really helpful. And something that honestly we would have never known his T was low if we weren't trying to, check all of our bases to try and conceive. Like we just would have never thought to even check that.
That's so interesting though. Like science is cool. What about you, Lindsay?
Yeah, so actually, I'm a little bit of the opposite situation. I was diagnosed because of all my symptoms. So I had been on oral birth control, starting in kind of towards the end of high school through college and wasn't feeling great. So decided to say, hey, I want to take the hormones out of my body. And I switched to actually the Paragard IUD, not realizing that by taking the pill, I was actually kind of preventing my PCOS from getting worse. And
Mm.
all of a sudden, like over a couple years, I had like an explosion of symptoms. And it was actually one of my mom's friends who had, I think she either had PCOS or her sister had it. And she recognized all of the symptoms. And she said to my mom, she said, like, I don't want to overstep, but, you might want to see if Lindsay will get tested for this. And it was really beneficial for me because I had, of course, been doing, I think, what we all do through this process and going online and checking out symptoms. And I was like, I think I might have this thing. And just hearing, someone else in my life say, like, hey, like she might have this, she might want to ask her doctor. So when I went to my doctor, I said, these are all my symptoms. And they did, a whole blood panel on me and then realized my hormones were all out of whack. And now I have an endocrinologist. And honestly, one of the, probably the best things to happen, at least, was getting the endocrinologist to help, manage my PCOS even post pregnancy.
Yeah, I feel like regular OBs just aren't really, or a gynecologist, I mean, are not really equipped to handle PCOS.
Yeah, I mean, I lucked out. I think that my gynecologist basically was like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna, give you a referral to the endocrinologist pretty much right away." And I didn't have to fight for it. And I know that's not the case for a lot of women, but it was nice that I also just had a supportive kind of medical team that said, you know what, we're gonna not like we're just gonna send you over to endocrinology and let them, figure it out. And I didn't feel like I had any blockers to at least get the diagnosis.
I always like hearing about the good medical experiences because so many times you hear about people who like, can't get the testing they need or things like that. So I think it's good that, you did have a good experience with that. So I know one thing about, trying to get pregnant after loss that we kind of touched on a little bit is, just the fear, losing another baby, the fear of not being able to get pregnant again, the fear of getting pregnant again. Like there's just a lot of things that we're, kind of scared of. So how is that something that you face and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, for me, it's so funny. You sound just like me this morning because I woke up and I was talking to my husband and I was like, I'm so scared to get pregnant, to not be able to get pregnant, to like get pregnant and lose it, to get pregnant and get it. Like, like it's just terrifying no matter, which way you look at it. I think that in addition to just kind of that unknown factor, I personally have a lot of fear about really just making sure I do have a solid medical team. I feel like when you get pregnant for the first time, you don't really know what to expect and you don't really know what you're going to get. And unfortunately for me, throughout my pregnancy, I was just experiencing different complications and situations that were happening, and I wasn't really being fully informed of like the reality of the situations and like the severity of it. And then when I my water did break and everything kind of started to happen, I was unfortunately impacted by some of those recent like women's health care laws where they don't want to intervene. And so that was like a very traumatic experience. They basically were like, hey, you got to go home and wait for the heart to stop beating. And like, we can't touch you because you're not this far along and we'll get sued. And it was just like very, it's just traumatic when you're going through something so scary already. And then like the people who are supposed to be able to help you literally tell you like, hey, we can't touch you. Like, we're not helping you. And you just have to like wait for this inevitable doom. And that was like a real theme throughout, like from when my water broke over the next 48 hours as I delivered, like in all of the different parts of the hospital, even going back to the hospital after I had her for other issues, like that kind of discrimination of like not being, I guess, pregnant enough to really get that medical care. And I think I'm just like now, especially with us being in such a like hot political climate and things, and it's on the ballot this year, it's scary. It's like you don't know what's going to happen, and unfortunately now I don't know if I'm going to be taken care of if something does happen. So definitely a lot of fear surrounding it.
Oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That makes a horrible situation just that much worse, that you feel
Yeah.
like you can't even trust the doctors to take care of you.
Yeah, it happens all too often. I'm learning. It's just really really sad, but it's really scary because a lot of women die during childbirth, and things happen. And when you're really put in that situation and you're really backed against that wall and they're like, hey, we're not doing anything, that's a very sobering place to be.
Do you have a reason for your loss? Like, do they know, is it something you're at risk for again?
So I was about 17 and a half weeks and my water just broke. So the situation, they said it could have been a weak sac, it could have been this or that. They don't know what it was. Probably also because they didn't intervene or try and like figure it out. But ironically enough, maybe a month ago, I was like randomly going through hospital notes and I saw that they listed like an infection, a bacterial infection that I had that causes people's water to break prematurely. And no one had ever told me. They kind of gave me that blanketed, oh, it's not your fault. It's nothing you did. Like these things just happen, just to like kind of pacify you and get it passed. But when I saw that that was on my medical chart, I was pissed because I was like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea that there was actually some kind of like issue or illness or something that could have really led to this. And I think that once you have a loss, you're questioning everything about your body. You're like, was it this? Was it that? Did I eat something? Is there something wrong with me? Looking further into the PCOS and all of these other situations, and to go through everything I did and so much testing just to get to the point where I could even have surgery. And then to find out after surgery that there was like a bacterial infection that nobody ever told you about is kind of crazy. So definitely now, since then I've moved, so I have a new medical team. I hand picked them. It's the doctor who did my surgery as well as who I would be seen by. So trying to kind of feel a little bit better about it, but you know, we only have so many hospital groups where I live. So they're all in the same hospital group anyway. So it's kind of just rolling the dice on it, honestly.
Yeah, that's really tough. I mean, you want to definitely find somebody you trust, but after your experience, I can understand why it would be hard to trust anybody.
Yeah. Well, especially when it's like the people, like the doctors themselves, the nurses, they don't really have control. Like, you know, they can do what they're gonna do, but everyone has, policies and rules and all of these things. And yeah, maybe you find that one person who's willing to step out on a limb and really do the right thing, but most people are gonna do what they have to do to keep their jobs and get paid and go home. So
Right.
It's just the reality of it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, I think once the fear started, it has never stopped. So again, it took me a long time to even get pregnant. And then we were on basically the last round of Clomid my doctor was willing to do before saying, hey, you need maybe a little bit more help. And that was, I got pregnant. It was so exciting. And then my numbers weren't doubling. And then my numbers were doubling. And then they weren't doubling. And it was really confusing. And at about 6 weeks, they looked and they couldn't even see a sac. So my doctor said, this may be an ectopic pregnancy. We came to realize, so basically, because it's ectopic, they gave me methotrexate, which pulls all the folate from your body. That's an early intervention for an ectopic pregnancy. So then, of course, I was afraid, oh my gosh, am I going to lose an ovary? Am I going to lose both ovaries? Like, who even knows? And by the time I went to the fertility clinic, which fortunately they were able to fit me in pretty quickly, which is unheard of, they actually were able to see the sacs. But what they realized is that it was twins. And then essentially one twin had passed very, very early on, and it was dead tissue in my uterus that then caused the other twin to not be able to thrive. But then because of the methotrexate, I had to wait for months. So then, of course, I thought, what have I done? And then when we started doing IUIs, again, it was a long time. And we got to the point where we were going to do IVF, which is just, a scary situation because you're putting a lot of hormones into your body and it's never guaranteed. And it's an expensive, challenging process. And you don't even know if they're going to be able to retrieve any eggs or if they're going to be fertilized or, if they're going to make it to blastocyst. So it's, every day you're waiting for that call that something else is going to go wrong. And then, I fortunately got pregnant off of our first transfer, and I was really excited to be pregnant again. And I thought, it's so rare to have multiple miscarriages. That's such a rare thing. Like most people have just the one and then they're good. And, we got to the point where we heard the heartbeat, and that was so exciting. Except then the doctor came in and said, okay, we can hear the heartbeat, but it's not enough beats per minute. So this next week is going to determine whether this pregnancy will survive or not. She said, I've seen it go both ways. It could a week from now, heartbeat could be fine, baby could be happy, healthy, or not. And then I came in the next week and I heard, the sentence that I think changes anyone's life when they hear it, which is, I'm sorry, we can't find a heartbeat. So from there, I, was given the medication to go home and manage, the miscarriage on my own. Essentially, they said we can either do a DNC or you can, do the misoprostol. The DNC has its own risks with, potential infection or what have you. So I did the misoprostol at home. It was, just as awful as the first time. But then they realized a few months later that my body hadn't expunged all the tissue and I now had a fibroid and now my uterus was impacted. So now I was terrified if I was going to get pregnant again, and then had a chemical pregnancy and then, finally got pregnant with my daughter. But, even in early pregnancy days, I had spotting at week 7 for like a straight week. So I thought, oh my gosh, am I miscarrying again? At the end of my pregnancy, my daughter was diagnosed with IUGR, intrauterine growth restriction, which can also impact babies being born. When you are an IVF pregnancy at 20 weeks, they also send you to a specialist for fetal cardiac, a fetal cardiac specialist, because babies born through IVF can have a higher chance of heart issues. And then when she was born, she was, really small. She was, 19 inches long, but only 5 pounds, 3 ounces, which is terrifying because she was born in the winter. And, babies always lose a little weight after they're born. And she was fine. And then she failed her car seat test. And they said, oh, like she actually might have a heart issue. So, even after my daughter was born, I was terrified because we then had to go to the NICU for a few days and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. And essentially, thankfully, it wound up just being really, really bad reflux, and she would hold her breath when she had reflux. But, you know, after that, it was then SIDS. So I think that fear never stops. And I think that's the hardest part of trying to conceive after any loss, because you don't know what that pain is like until you go through it. And after you go through it, you hope that no one you know or love ever has to go through it, because it's horrible. And again, that fear is also, it's keeping us, I think part of the thing, among other things, it's keeping us from saying, hey, let's try for another. Because in my mind, I'm like, we have our happy, healthy, alive daughter. And I am afraid to go through the physical pain, the emotional pain, any of that again.
Yeah, that's definitely a lot that you have been through. A lot of things to be afraid of.
Yeah. And I think, where I my experience, I think, differed from Karina's is, I at least had a really supportive medical team the entire way, who helped with pain management, who like one of the things I love about my fertility clinic is they actually have a weekly group, or it's like a, sorry, not weekly, I think it's bi-weekly group of women who are going through IVF or IUIs or just infertility, like a therapy group, and they promote it everywhere in the clinic. So I was really fortunate in that I had a great medical team behind me, because if I had had not the team I had, I don't know if I would have been able to continue.
Yeah, I think people really underestimate like how much we really need support from, family and friends and also from the medical team. It's something that we're kind of just left to deal with like on our own, but we can't deal with it on our own. Like we need the support.
Well, and I think too, like it is, sad but helpful when there are people that that have gone through that loss, because everyone in my life wanted to be supportive, but I found that the people who really knew the best things to say, or, how to just be there for me, were the people that had experienced it. Not that the people in my life who hadn't gone through it weren't supportive and great, but it was in a way sadly comforting to know that other people actually knew what that pain felt like.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That's something that has been helpful for me as well. Like, again, I don't want anyone to have had to go through it ever, but it's really nice to know that you're not alone in how you feel and that you're not crazy for how you feel. So the next question, I know, Karina, that you're still, just starting to try, but do negative tests affect you, or do you think that they will affect you? Like if you get a negative test?
Yeah, so like before I did the surgery, we were trying. So I would say probably probably at least a solid year that we were trying and trying to track the ovulation and, testing every month and being a couple of days late and then being like, oh, this feels familiar. Maybe that's it. So the negative tests are definitely discouraging. They're definitely, you're all you want to see is those two lines really light up. So it's very hard to keep yourself motivated and keep trying and keep going each day. And I mean, a negative test in the morning could like ruin my whole day, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah.
But now it's been a while since we've been trying. So that's why it's like now getting back into it is kind of scary, because it's like, okay, those expectations and that hope gets really high. And, you don't want to be let down again. And, it just really opens up a whole nother medical bag of worms, because like she said, the doctors tell you to try for at least about 6 months or 3 to 6 months, and then to go to a fertility clinic. And it is very expensive. You have to even counteract if that's even realistically an option. Cause I know like some people end up spending easily what 20, 30, 40, 50,000 plus on IVF if that's the only option. So it's definitely something that we've thought about, but just kind of keeping those fingers crossed.
Yeah, and I think for me, when it came to testing, I mean, at least in the first 6 months, I was one of those people that I bought every single brand of test, because in my mind, like maybe one of the tests would be positive and maybe the other ones just weren't sensitive enough. And then, again, seeing the negative test month after month after month was so rough that I actually still, like, the very first positive test that I took at home, I saved from my very first pregnancy, because it felt like such a momentous thing. But I actually didn't realize I was pregnant, and I went to the doctor for a Clomid follow-up, because I had just been like, it's probably not going to happen. I'm just going to go to IVF. So I actually found out from my doctor that I was pregnant because they did a test in the office. But then when I was going through IVF, what a lot of people don't realize if they haven't gone through it is that, as soon as you have your transfer, you essentially have to supplement with progesterone, which means injections every morning, and sometimes a suppository at night, depending on, your doctors and how they're handling your medications. But you have to do those progesterone injections from the moment, well, actually before they do the transfer, all the way up until after the 2 week wait. So yes, you can get a positive test in that 2 week wait. But for me, I said to myself, okay, but if I get a negative test, it could just be an early negative, but I'm still gonna have to do these shots knowing that I have a negative test. And it's gonna make doing the medication that much harder, knowing most likely it's just a negative, pregnancy test and it didn't work. And then I'm still doing these shots and I'm gonna be resentful about it. So actually, when I did my IVF transfers, I said, you know what, I am not taking a pregnancy test. I will just wait for the 2 weeks and I will do the blood draw and my doctors will know because there is no test more sensitive than that blood draw.
That's actually a question I was going to ask is if you took the tests before you got the beta results, but I didn't think about that with the progesterone shots because yeah, I would definitely not want to keep doing those if I got a negative test.
Yeah, and it was advice that I got from one of my friends who had gone through IVF because she did the test because she was like, I just had to know. But she said every time I got a negative, it was so hard for me to like continue doing the progesterone shots every morning because our clinic has you do them in the morning. So she was like, it was so hard to start my days with those shots, knowing that most likely the test result was negative. And in that moment, I was like, you know what? We'll just wait for the beta because it's what I have to wait maybe 3 more days than if I peed on the stick. And I was like, those 3 days of not knowing are worth it rather than getting the negative test and having to do 3 more like giant painful shots.
Yeah, I definitely don't blame you there. I don't like waiting, but I also hate shots. So we didn't go through IVF, but we did other fertility treatment and I had to do some of the shots and I was really scared of needles, but I learned how to get over that when I had to do the shots. So So do you have any advice for people that are trying to get pregnant after a loss?
I would just say give yourself grace. Give yourself grace. Find community, find people that kind of can support you and really understand what you're going through. One of the good things that I guess I won't say the good things that came out of it, but the one of the good things the hospital did offer me, because I did end up having to go back to the hospital and deliver naturally. But when you check out, they give you this box with all this stuff in it, and one of them was a pamphlet to a grief group for other mothers who had suffered pregnancy loss, and there was maybe about 5 or 6 of us that did the 7-week course. We had all experienced our losses pretty close together, and we're all still very close. Some of the women have had losses again. One of them's pregnant now, one of them had a baby last year, so it's kind of nice to have people who understand, but kind of you can see that light at the end of the tunnel for yourself. But really it's just one day at a time. Give yourself grace, and you just have to kind of love yourself through it. I think it's very easy in these situations to find so much that's wrong with us, and it definitely does not help.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's your decisions and your body. So if the light at the end of the tunnel for everyone could look different. I mean, there are definitely people who are super lucky like I was, and we got our daughter because I went through IVF, and I am very thankful that I work at a company that has those fertility benefits to help me through it. But I think you know you get a lot of messaging from people that say like, oh, like it's okay, just try again, and it's okay to not want to try again. It's okay to say, this is the end of my journey and I don't want to keep going. And I think one thing that I have been telling people too, you can do everything. You can do every trick in the book. You can take supplements. You can take, you can eat a super healthy diet. You can say, I'm, not gonna drink the night before I ovulate. But at the end of the day, a lot of what happens in conceiving, it's a lot of luck. I mean, luck is definitely a key thing because you see people get pregnant in all different ways. So it's just not your fault. And I think, especially with those of us who suffer with infertility because of PCOS, I think we're so quick to blame ourselves. So my advice is, don't blame yourself. Try and find something that you really love to do that is completely outside of, your infertility journey. For me, that was riding horses. It's something I'd love to do my whole life. I got back into it because it gave me an outlet that it gave me a place to go. It gave me a, great group of friends, and it gave me something to focus on that wasn't just, thinking about the infertility at all times, because you have to give yourself that mental break. It is already a hard enough journey. It is even harder after you go through loss. Like you need to find outlets where you get to just enjoy something that makes you happy, something that makes you relaxed. And it can be, anything. So I guess that's kind of a lot of advice, but those are kind of all the things. Oh, and I guess lean on your support people. Your family and your friends and everyone are here to support you however you need it. And it's okay to not be the tough person that doesn't show their feelings, because that is why we have, our communities.
So does it bother either of you to see other women who are pregnant or babies? Does it bother you to be around them or anything?
I really struggled with that actually initially. I would probably say for maybe at least a year after, maybe a year and a half, it was really rough for me to see pregnant women or, little babies and things like that. And whether it was at the grocery store or at work and things like that, I had people around me that fortunately respected it and kind of knew, so they would kind of try and like protect me from it. But there were definitely times where I had to be like, yeah, I'm not coming in today. Like, you guys are gonna do a big, huge, whole massive Mother's Day thing, and everyone's bringing their kids. I'm not coming. I will see you the next day. So definitely things like that. But I recently had a coworker who actually just delivered maybe a month ago, 6 weeks ago. And so throughout the course of her pregnancy, I really just had to kind of get it together. Because I was like, you don't want to make other people feel guilty or, shamed going through their pregnancy. And so I kind of just took the mindset of like, well, maybe one day it'll be me. And, when it is me, how do I want people to treat me and support me through it at that time? So eventually it's gotten a little bit easier, but it was definitely a very, very, very sore subject for a long time.
Yeah, for me, it was really hard for me to be around. I mean, granted, if I'm going to the store, I probably will see a child. I think something that was super hard was when I was sitting in the fertility clinic waiting for results, and people would bring their children there. That was probably the hardest place I ever saw children. Like Karina, I was really fortunate that the people in my life were very understanding. I mean, one of my closest friends, she's been really lucky. It's been really easy for her to have her children, and I remember I think it was after my maybe second miscarriage. I can't remember exactly the timing, but her second child was having a first birthday. And I said, this is, I think it was, I'm sorry, it was after my first miscarriage. I said, I'm really sorry. I cannot come. Like, I would be happy to do something just us with your children, but I was like, I can't mentally, like, I'm not ready to come to a children's birthday party. And I was really lucky because she basically was like, oh my gosh, I totally understand, like, you do whatever you need to do. I just wanted to make sure you felt included, because I think that's another thing that's challenging, is that especially with family members or friends who are fortunate and they are able to get pregnant easily, they don't, like, I didn't want to not be included in their lives. But I was also really grateful when I said this is a little bit too much for me, that they were understanding, but that they still offered at least the invitation. Because I think that's one thing that's hard for anyone going through this, is you don't want to just suddenly be cut off because someone's afraid to like hurt your feelings about, asking you to their child's birthday party or a Mother's Day celebration, because then it makes you feel even more on the outside.
Yeah, I think it's nice, like you said, to have the invitation, but for them to also be understanding when you can't come. You need to not be excluded, but also have them be supportive and understanding if you just aren't mentally there.
Yeah. And I will say some of those people wound up being my biggest cheerleaders once I finally did get pregnant. So it was, I think, kind of to Karina's point, it was, nice knowing like that you had those people in your circle for when you were pregnant and they were so excited for you because it made you feel even better.
So, are there any particular resources that you've found helpful?
For me, definitely felt that it was called the Heal Group that I went to. That was very helpful because it kind of educated me on what grief really was. I haven't had like a bunch of personal loss in my life, so this was like the first really significant loss that hit me that hard in my adult life. So that resource was invaluable to me. Outside of that, though, I've joined like there's a couple of like charities around the country and things like that, and they'll kind of send like care packets and things like that. And now like every year on her birthday they send a care packet. I got a Molly Bear made, so that's like another organization, and they will actually customize a weighted bear that weighs the exact amount that your child weighed, and like they embroider their name on it and things like that. So that was something else that I poured into. I try and give back to them, like on her birthday and things, and like you'll still get those little emails and things, and they're like, "Oh, like we're honoring, remembering her with you." So as many things that I can do like that kind of just keep her memory alive in my life in one way or another is kind of what I try to do.
I was gifted a weighted bear after losing
Oh,
Jasmine, and I found it really helpful, because your arms just feel so empty and it's just nice to hold something.
yeah.
Yeah, for me, I mean, we did have that grief group at my IVF clinic, but honestly, just really leaning on the women who reached out to me and said, "Hey, I've been through this. Like, if you have questions or if you need to vent to someone, please do." And I actually took them up on it. I think it can be uncomfortable, especially because a lot of them were my coworkers, but I definitely leaned into that and I was really grateful that they were willing to have those conversations with me. And again, I found online resources. I think that's why we're all here on this podcast because I think your account, Sarah, really helped me with my losses because it made me feel less alone. So not necessarily saying you can find all the best information online, but especially if you're looking for that community of, whether you're going through infertility or fertility treatments or loss, there are a lot of other people out there that have done that. And even just knowing like you're not the only one. Because I think for all, like, at least for me, I felt like I'm the only one that's ever gone through this exact situation. And there's no one else in the world that knows what this feels like, but there are. So even, quick Instagram or TikTok search or what have you, you can definitely find people out there just like you. And just knowing I wasn't alone made me feel a lot better.
So, is there anything else that you would like to share or add before we wrap up?
I would probably just say for anyone, whether they're trying to conceive or pregnant or wherever you have you, like I think it's just very important for women to advocate for themselves with their medical providers in hospitals, in the ERs, in those every appointment, make sure that you're really communicating what you want and asking for clarity on things so that you really kind of, can be as informed as possible and make those best decisions for yourself.
Yeah, I have kind of, I guess, two pieces of advice. So for women going through it, especially infertility, I know for me, IVF was really scary, but I felt like, at least for me, it made me feel like I had some control back because I feel like you feel so like out of control when you go through loss or fertility treatments. But obviously they're pretty expensive, but there are a lot of companies in the United States now that do have fertility coverage. And there are lists online where you can find, which companies offer it if they work part-time or full-time. And I definitely recommend, if you're thinking of going that route, taking advantage of companies that offer that benefit because it really did help. And then for people who are trying to support people going through loss, at least statements are the worst. So please don't use them. Hearing like, at least you can get pregnant, or at least, this probably will only happen one time. It doesn't help. I know it is meant to be so helpful, but it's so harmful to say those things. So obviously, please just give the people in your life going through loss a little bit of grace and try not to make it seem not so bad. The most helpful thing you can say is, "I'm really sorry. This is an awful thing that happened to you. I'm here for whatever you need." That was kind of the best language that I was able to accept during those times. And, I definitely had friends that just showed up to my house with food, and that was always appreciated too. So don't try and minimize people's pain just because you want to try and make them feel better.
Yeah, definitely ditto on that.
Yeah, I feel like people try to overcomplicate it somehow and say these things because they think it's helpful. But yeah, all we really need is for you to say, like, hey, I'm here for you if you need me. Like, you know, I'm here to listen. That's all we need. We don't need anything.
Yeah, I remember
Yeah.
I went to one of my friends and I was like, "This sucks." And she just went, "This does suck. How can I help you?" Just hearing someone else say, "You know what, this does suck," back to me, not trying to be like, "Oh, but you have all these things in your life." I was like, that was so validating.
Yeah, so validating.
That's like the perfect response. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for coming on today and sharing your stories with us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us. And also, like I said, for your account. It was one of the ones I found when I was really in the trenches. So thank you for putting this community together too.
Thank you so much to both of you for sharing your stories with us. Trying to get pregnant again after going through loss is such a struggle for so many of us. We so badly want a baby in our arms, and we want to remain hopeful. But at the same time, it's so terrifying thinking about having another loss, not being able to get pregnant again, or not ever being able to bring a baby home. There are just so many conflicting feelings. And I often get asked, how do you know if you're ready to try again? My answer to that is I don't think you're ever fully 100% ready. You just have to decide that the hope and desire to have a baby come home is stronger than the fear and the anxiety. And I'm not saying any of it's easy. It is so difficult. It was difficult for me too. But I believe that we're all stronger than what we give ourselves credit for. Are you trying to get pregnant after loss? Have you already had a rainbow baby? Where are you at in your journey? Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a review or rating on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a moment and really helps the show reach more loss and infertility families. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, we are all in this together.